Okay, Cherbs, here's a quick anecdote. The violinist Joshua Bell, at the peak of his skill and fame, played to a packed house at Boston's Symphony Hall for people who paid more than $100 for a ticket. It was extremely well reviewed, and he is generally considered one of the best violinists in the world. 3 days later, with the same violin and playing the same music, he performed for free in a subway station. A few people paused, but he was largely ignored. In a concert hall, people were ready to pay attention to the nuance of his art, and they were prepared to be moved by it. There was an expectation that great music would happen. In the subway, there just wasn't. The context mattered. In some ways, this is intuitive. Context changes the way we view works of art. I wrote a whole TED Ed video on this aspect of the Statue of David. Link in the description. There's also a TED Ed video on the Joshua Bell experiment, link also in the description. And this is one of the greatest aspects of being in a museum, gallery, or concert hall. When you walk into a museum space, your contract with the world shifts, and you agree to look for purpose in everything. You make a conscious effort to let yourself be moved and think of the items around you as the remains of an important vision. The context of being in a museum matters. And perhaps more than that, the context with which we see any work of art matters. So the spaces in which we perceive art can change the way we perceive it. Good. We've established that. But here's the interesting thing. Sometimes a work of art can change the way that we view the spaces. Sometimes a work of art can shift the way that you perceive the gallery, the auction space, or wherever the work may be. The museum space does a great job of providing us with context to look for meaning, but some work changes the way that we look for meaning and rewrites that contract. The work of Sarah Charlesworth does this, and this one is called The Text. At first glance, it appeared to me as a landscape of bunched up satin cloth extending beyond the crop of the image. Then my eyes adjusted, and I realized that the peaks and valleys of that landscape were caused by a book beneath the satin. I don't know if it takes everybody's eyes a little bit to adjust, or if this is just me. I don't know your story or the way that you perceive things. And that might end up being the point of this video in a meta kind of way. Once my eyes adjusted to that, I realized that there is indeed some illegible text that can be seen beneath the cloth, which is both reflective, it's clearly reflecting light, and transparent. I can see the text beneath it. So the text obviously gives this print its title and also calls attention to the colors involved. The image is black and white. A normal page of text is black and white. And so it asks us to reflect on reading an image the way we would a text, or on the differences between reading either of those. Once we decide to stop scanning the image and start probing into it, taking it seriously, and looking for meaning, one of the first things we'll notice is that our relationship to the text is through the satin that obscures it. This distortion is analogous to the way textual communication is obscured through our imperfect way of understanding it. Like, the thought in my head can never perfectly be put into words. The acoustic vibration originating in my throat and manipulated by my tongue will never truly be understood by the way that your brain processes the vibrations that reach your ear. If I try to take those thoughts and translate them into written language, lines on a page, which the reader's eye will then interpret, they will bring with them all of their own personal histories and associations to those words. And I haven't even discussed the impact of font or handwriting or the way that you'll interpret my facial expressions or monotone voice. I read the comments. I know that some of you think that I sound like Squidward. So each time the thought is translated into some new form, speech, text, recording of the speech, the message decays a little. It gets a little bit further from its origin. True communication has so many obstacles to overcome. When we look back at Sarah Charlesworth's print, we start to see all the layers meaning needs to be translated through. The text is transformed by the satin. The image of satin is then transformed when reflected light is captured by the camera sensor. That image is then transformed by printing it. Then, and this is arguably the most significant, the print is transformed by the eyes of the viewer with all of the personal associations that the viewer will bring to that image. And I definitely did not account for many of the other transformations the original thought undergoes in this process. So one way of looking at this is that Charlesworth is asking us to consider all the ways meaning decays as it is communicated and translated by each new form and each new mind that encounters it. Which is kind of depressing. Like, we can never truly communicate a thought. Every thought we have decays as soon as we attempt to make it public. But another way to see this is that she's asking us to find pleasure in this decay, and rather think of it as an act of creation. Maybe the intended meaning of the text will be lost, but new meanings will be created. So when you're in a museum, you are creating meaning every time you look at a work of art, independent from what the author intended. The viewers of this print will actually create meaning when they view it by bringing with them the memory of past images. The viewer creates meaning and finds relevance in everything. It's not a decay of meaning, but the genesis of meaning. If we return to the title of this piece, we can see a reference to the late 20th century intellectual Roland Barthes, who wrote a work of literary theory called The Pleasure of the Text. Barthes is most famous today as the author of an influential paper entitled The Death of the Author, and he promoted the idea that the audience of a work creates meaning. He proposed making the reader no longer a consumer, but a producer of the text. If we do that, then rather than focus on the decay of meaning, we can be excited by the creation of multiple meanings, and that's the pleasure of the text. Barthes would often use a Latin phrase to explain his philosophy: larvatus prodeo, I advance, pointing to my mask. And this is relevant here. There is the authentic thing, the signified, and then there is the way that the thing is expressed and communicated, the signifier. It's the sign that communicates information, not the thing itself. Charlesworth is pointing to the mask with this work. She's pointing at the stuff that masks or directs us towards authentic or original ideas, in order for us to focus on how meaning is created and communicated. This theme runs through much of her work. In her series called Modern History, she removed the text from newspapers in order to reveal the design of the images on the page. They almost appear like Mondrian compositions when presented like this, and so we're forced to consider how the layout of the images on the page creates meaning, how this medium creates its message. And by pointing to that mask, we progress. We can see how we're being manipulated or persuaded. We are not looking for the meaning itself, but how the meaning is created. Now imagine her work in a gallery or auction house and how it might change the way that you look at the art around it. Instead of thinking about the artist's intention or the intended communication, you'll start to focus on the way that the communication works. You'll notice different ways artists transmit their message, but more importantly, you'll also be more aware of the meaning and biases that you bring to a work as you create meaning as its audience. A sound produced by Joshua Bell or the Statue of David may change meanings depending on where you perceive them, but a Sarah Charlesworth will change the way that you look for meaning in the first place by asking you to consider how that meaning is made. The knowledge that is produced by a work of art is produced by you, and that act of creation and being aware of your role in the creation is the pleasure of experiencing art. I want to end here with a quotation from Dave Hickey, an art critic who once described her work. He said that her endeavor seems grounded in knowing the world is pleasurable in itself, because we must know the world in order to survive in it. It allows us the privilege of knowing the world while knowing the pleasure of knowing it. It is grounded in the same premise, that there are no autonomous, disinterested positions from which we may know anything. In other words, her work shows us that we are never disinterested observers of the world around us. We are constantly finding ways to create meaning, and this is creation. And the knowledge of this creation is a joyful experience. If you like this video and want to see more like it, please consider subscribing. I put out a new video in the middle of every month. Thank you for watching.